According to an Al Jazeera report, veteran Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was shot dead while on assignment in the West Bank. It throws the spotlight on the safety of journalists. Al Jazeera says another Palestinian journalist, al-Samoudi, was wounded in the back but is in a stable condition. For more on the story, we're joined via Zoom by Thembisa Fakude, Senior Research Fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogues. Thembisa, a very good day to you. Thanks for joining us. Condolences, and I understand you knew Shireen very well. What kind of person was she?
Well, she was a very helpful person. That's one way you can describe Shireen. She welcomed a number of journalists in her office, both in Gaza and in the West Bank, as she was one of the oldest members of Al Jazeera at the time. So I knew her very well. In fact, I worked with her husband in South Africa covering the inauguration of President Thabo Mbeki when President Thabo Mbeki was inaugurated. So she was a very helpful person, a very well-liked and experienced journalist, a very well-known journalist in the Middle East, because she was working for one of the most watched television network in the region. So it's a great loss, not only for the institution, but also for the entire Middle East, because she was a very, very good journalist.
We're told she'd been reportedly covering an Israeli army raid on the Jenin refugee camp when she was shot in the face. What does it tell about the safety of journalists in this region?
Well, it's not the first time. She was, on a number of occasions, attacked by the Israeli army. At some point, the Israeli armored vehicle drove directly into her, trying to crash into her. So it was not the first time that this has happened, but it's a very sad day for the media fraternity in the region, particularly in Palestine, where the particular Arab journalists are continually prevented from doing their jobs. So it's a very, very sad day, and one hopes that this time around something will happen, and then that this time around the world, particularly the United States, will put pressure on Israel to answer and to give reasons why this had to happen. Because, you know, it's not the first time. Al Jazeera offices, if you remember, were bombed in full view of the entire world, and nobody said a word about it. You have dozens of Al Jazeera journalists that are arrested throughout the world and continue to be harassed by governments such as the one of Israel, and nothing has been happening. So we're hoping that this time around something will happen and justice will be served.
So what kind of working conditions, newsroom policies and any other support do we have for journalists to guarantee their safety?
Well, unfortunately, nothing we have at the moment. I mean, we're all at the mercy of our national governments whenever violations against the members of the media incur. So we don't have much. There are moves at the moment to push for some sort of resolution, particularly at the UN level, where journalists can be protected. But as it stands, all of us are at the mercy of governments, wherever we operate, to actually protect us. But there is no law, no rule, or an international position regarding the protection of journalists around the world. There are a lot of lobby groups that are working towards putting something in place. But right now, we are all at the mercy of national governments.
Some very prominent people, especially Palestinian sympathizers, have commented on the passing of Shireen. What have you heard among the journalism fraternity?
Well, there's been condemnation all around. We've heard, particularly this morning on Twitter, a number of journalists have condemned what has happened, and they're putting pressure on Israel to answer. Al Jazeera has issued a very strong worded statement in this regard. But, you know, Israel has had this impunity for a very long time, and one will be very surprised if anything substantial can't come out of this. They've done the worst in the past. Not only did they bomb the offices of Al Jazeera, but they've continued to harass Al Jazeera journalists. So we hope that this time around something will happen, given that Joe Biden has indicated that he would like to see the proliferation of democracy. And Israel is known to be one of those countries that has actually disregarded those goals. But we hope that this time around something will happen.
I'm just going to use the opportunity of having you here now just to talk about how the Ukrainian-Russian situation has literally put the Mid-East conflict in the background. What sort of global journalistic issues exist at the moment that are not being dealt with as a result of focus on Russia and Ukraine?
Well, there's a lot that's going on, and there are a lot of stories that are taking place. For example, very big story in the Philippines, where the Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of a former dictator, was elected. You had the ongoing standoff and war in Ethiopia, in the Tigray region, that no one is really looking at. Yemen continues to be a problem. We've got people, the Uyghurs in China, who are continually oppressed by the Chinese government. So outside what's been happening in Ukraine, there's a lot that's going on. But at the same time, you have a number of journalists that are going through very, very difficult times, particularly in countries like Russia, where the war has been continuing, or that Putin's war in Ukraine has continued. In Ukraine itself, you had some of the journalists that have been threatened because of this indiscriminate bombing of various cities in Ukraine. So the plight of journalists continues, and notwithstanding that this is a very important story to be told, that is Ukrainian story, but a lot of things that are happening around the world that deserve similar attention.
Thembisa, thank you so much for making the time to speak to us today. Thembisa Fakude is a senior research fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogues, and talking to us about the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, an iconic Palestinian journalist known for her extensive coverage of the events in the Palestine and the practices of the Israeli occupation authorities in the Palestine territories.